welcome everybody to the Data Enrich Bushel Podcast, where we dive into transformative opportunities at the intersection of sustainability, technology, and agriculture. Today we'll be discussing unlocking carbon value with an emphasis on ag retail partnerships. We'll discuss how digital strategies can unlock new revenue streams, redefine relationships across the value chain, and empower retailers to drive meaningful impact. We're also going to explore the evolving role of ag retailers in the carbon economy and unpack a fundamental shift in the mindset we are seeing from supply-side subsidies to demand-side premiums. So let's get started. All right, we got a new addition to the JAG team, Jason Little, and joining us today, our special guest, Jeff Schreiner from Cultura Technologies. Gentlemen, could you please introduce yourselves and give us a little bit about your background?
Sure, Chris. Yeah, really happy to be joining you guys. So I have what you would call a nonlinear career, right? Like I've been in that my whole life. Yeah, Dan knows. Third generation farm boy. Have gone from working with the basic manufacturers on research and sales, business development, to a couple of my own little companies, landscaping business and a construction company, construction equipment company, and then. About a decade ago, I got a call from a neighbor and wanted to have a conversation, realized that I was in a job interview, and I got pulled into the world of AgTech. So that was a little company out of Champaign, Illinois called Agrible. I was director of sales there and was part of the team that put the deal together to sell that to Nutrien Ag Solutions for $63 million in 2018. So. Pretty successful startup exit there. Was with Nutrien for a couple years and then went on and became a VP of ecosystem strategy over at Indigo. And did that for a few years as well. But at some point, roughly 2019-ish, it became apparent to me the magnitude of the transformation that was going to hit agriculture, this digital transformation. And I knew that I did not have the skills that I needed. I was having a hard time identifying people around me that had the skills that I thought were needed. So I decided that I was going to go on that journey and start to acquire and develop them. Finished up my MBA, a couple other things. And so now I kind of live at that intersection of ag tech and sustainability. Yeah, and that's really the sweet spot. And that's really what I'm enjoying doing here. So that's
Jason, I got to ask you a question before you go, Chris.
Sure.
That intersection, as Chris opened us up with that, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, is it a four-way stop, or is it one of those circles, that we see so much now today? That's kind of like you got ag, you got sustainability, you got technology, all those kinds of things that are coming there, and it's more of that. I think it's more of it's not a. You go up and it's a right angle turn. It is a four-way. It is one of those circles, I think, that kind of goes around. But anyhow, I just wanted to throw that in there. And
that's what they love out there in Colorado. That's why Colorado is becoming a hub for ag tech, right? Because that's all you guys do is roundabouts.
There you go.
Yeah, I would say
there you go.
If it's any roundabout in this day and age, it's Piccadilly Circle right now. You remember, like, just trying to get out of that thing, going around.
Yeah.
Nelson Monument.
I was going to say, it feels some days like it's like 2 or 3 major highways all coming together and the stop signals are out.
That's the circle. There you go.
Yep. So,
Jeff.
Yeah.
Welcome, Jeff. Glad to have you on.
Guy that knows a thing or two about technology.
I know just a couple of things. My knowledge erodes over time, but I'll try to do my best. Jason, I like your linear analogy. I have the same nonlinear background. Started as growing up on a farm in Nebraska, in rural Nebraska. Then took a slight deviation into physics and into the financial world for a while, and did a few startups. But then came back home and had a lot of technology type roles at food producers and milling companies. Ardent Mills was one of my career trading businesses like Schooler Grain. And then most recently, I joined a company called Cultura Technology Probably claim to fame is a portfolio of businesses, but the biggest trading platform being Agris is a part of our portfolio. So a lot of that first trade to market, a lot of digital stuff becomes from contract, phone call to an actual trade inside of a system in a lot of our technologies. And it's a great topic for today, because I think, this is a way for us to weave how the back end financial engine plugs into how the evolution of agriculture goes into digital business. So yeah, looking forward to it.
So Jeff, what share of the market does Agris have right now?
In certain
Cultura in
spaces,
general.
yeah, in certain spaces, depending on the type. If you break down food, feed, fiber, energy, and energy, we're over 50% of the market. Where some of our customers we're 54.5% of the ethanol market, and they'll use either the contracting systems or solutions, or one of our scale or testing or bin management solutions. A lot of our companies have been doing this for years and years. For 20 plus years, they've been in that space. On food and energy, we're up there. A lot of our systems are used for that first raw product contract that comes off a farm, the buyer, and then the seller systems. So yeah, we're in a lot of cases, because of heritage and legacy and the amount of time we've been in the industry, we have a vast majority of all the transactions in the space.
I realize we called this show the Data Enrich Bushel Podcast, but I don't think we've actually done an episode explaining what we mean by Data Enrich Bushels, trademark Jag Group, all rights reserved. So Dan, can you explain? I mean, you're the one that kind of coined this term for us. Can you explain, what are Data Enrich Bushels?
Well, I don't believe there's any original ideas, and especially from an old dirt farmer from North Dakota, I don't think that's going to happen very often. But, and hey, Brad, we don't get introduced anymore. I guess are we famous now or what?
You are, man.
You were infamous, maybe.
Well,
Notorious.
I'm calling in, as you can tell, I'm calling in from the asylum here. We've done a lot of decorating here.
Oh, that's funny.
Dan Olson is the Kaiser Soze of ag. Like, he's just in the background and knows everybody. So no introductions needed.
That's funny. So, you know what, like I said, I don't think it's an original idea. I think I've used the term for a while, and I know, Jeff, you and I have talked about it many times, and it's gone from data enriched bushels to data enriched grades to, it kind of takes on its own meaning to a certain extent. But here's what it is. Most of us have been in the grain industry, ag industry, and we understand what are the attributes of number 2 yellow corn. How much does it weigh? What's the moisture? Those kinds of things, how much in the sample, how much foreign materials in there, all those kinds of things. It's how the industry basically looks at it. And with the, carbon is one of those terms that, let's make it sustainability. And Jason, I think you have some great terminology when it comes to what sustainability is and return on investment, and how does that equate out to farming. But, to me, it is, as we look at this in today's world, and trying to make a difference in our children and our grandchildren's and our great grandchildren's life, and I've got some of those, and it's you've got to be able to take and add the other attribute, and it's about how do we measure basically the sustainability of something via the data that comes from the dirt, the air, production, whatever it might be. So as we take a look at that, and what I think is one of the main reason I'd love to have Jeff on this call with us is that as we've talked about this, and we look at the ethanol space, you're gonna look at it and say, okay, the ethanol plant may originate 50%, 40%, 70% of their bushels, but there's a bunch that come from other places. And it isn't just about fuel; it's about feed, it's about food. And what is it that bushel, and I guess there's a bunch of farmers that are out there today going, how in the heck am I ever going to be ready to gain some more revenue? Data enrichment and the willingness to try to attach that to the physical commodity, to me, is what's the most important thing. And I think it's important because, Jeff, your systems measure that and quantify it and bring it into the data, the raw data into it, and then others can work with it however, but you've got to be able to move it down, as we go back to how the grain industry started. I started out with a horse and a wagon in the field, with a threshing machine. I'm not that old, but close. And then we moved it into a single axle truck, and then it got moved into a tandem, and now we only use semis. But it moves from one point of efficiency to the next point, to the rail, and then the rail to the barge, and then out to a ship to go someplace, or internally it gets processed. We have to be able to move that along. The originator and the merchandiser have to be able to grab not only the physical attributes of that kernel or that bushel, but it's everything else that goes with it, from the data set and how it was produced, what kind of seed it was, what chemicals went on it, how was it sequestered, how was it, all those different things have to come into play. And we have to be able to grab it, attach it, and move it. And so that others can value it and we can get more money back for it as growers. I think that's, if I was going to describe, and you guys can differ with me, but that's how I kind of look at the data enrichment. It's just another attribute of kind of what that pedigree is of that particular kernel of corn, soybean, whatever, kernel of rice, whatever it is that's coming down the pipe. And I think we have to kind of take a look at it that way. So that's how Chris, that's how I kind of describe it. So,
I mean, to get those attributes, you need a digital strategy, right? And people throw around digital strategy like a buzzword. And those that are listening instead of watching, like I'm doing air quotes, like, digital strategy, like they say synergy, right? But what does that mean? Like, is a digital strategy a tool, like an app or a platform? Is it a marketing campaign, a business model? So Jeff, you're the expert in this space. So how would you define a digital strategy in agriculture? Like, and what are the key differences between a digital offering and a true digital business model?
Sure. Chris, I would probably
by customer type too, Jeff, if you would.
Yeah.
Farmer, I'm joking, but they're different. All these things are different. So I apologize.
Yeah, maybe I would tell you, I would start with the strategy is a perspective on the horizon. So what do you see as technology comes into play for a point of view that's somewhere down the line? In effect, the reality of any digital strategy, like it's applied to agriculture or in any industry, really consists of about three different basic parts. One is you record something in a technology, it becomes a leverage point to get operational efficiency. So from the company's point of view or the farmer's point of view, the more data you know, the more information you can create, the better you are at execution. So cutting waste out of the system, leveraging things that make the most sense, and just becoming more operationally efficient because you know more and you have better telemetry about how you're operating. That's consistent entry point for any digital strategy. But beyond that, what most would see is a strategy that leads me into new and different networks, so new connectivities that I may not have had if it wasn't digital. Digital is great. It never sleeps. It goes 24 hours a day, and I can continually extend my network beyond my physical boundaries. And that really is the second tier of digitization, which is once you get things in a system, and ag's not even all the way there. You still have a lot of paperwork floating around in our system. But once you get there, the next step in the equation is how can I leverage it, and who really cares about this stuff? And what kind of partners do I have? What kind of sellers and buyers would like to see this in a digital platform? And that's really the immediate horizon beyond just getting things in a system on a platform. The third tier would be, well, now that I've got a new horizon and a new network, you can create completely different digital business models. So maybe the front of my business changes, or the way in which I execute, or even the way in which I position my whatever I'm trying to sell. That is really the three basic steps of any digital strategy. And when you get to the longer term view, those that started early and started getting their things and started to see the horizon are always better off over the course of time to get better positioned for that future where the industry is completely transformed. And I think that's really the true game of anything. And every other industry has gone through this. Agriculture has been slow to adopt a complete digital model for a variety of reasons, not all of which are bad. But But once the strategy comes into play, doesn't matter what part of the value chain you sit on, it's the same basic experience. Stuff in digital format. Do I have new network, new partners that I can deal with? And do I have a point in time where I need to relook at what business I actually do to create something different?
So Jason, I got a question for you then, and I'm gonna put you just talk about nonlinear career, right? As 25 years as a special forces officer. So when we talk about strategy in the military, and grand strategy, we talk about it in the concepts of ends, ways, and means, right? So ends is your goal or objective you're trying to achieve. Means is the resources and tools you have available to execute that strategy. And ways is how you actually execute it, right? So how you go about implementing your means to achieve your ends. So I'm going to throw you a little loop here, Jason, but if we're talking about strategy in terms of ends, ways, and means, why is a digital strategy essential for ag retailers today? And how would you define ag retailer?
Sure. I mean, I'd like to just build off a little bit of what Jeff said first, right? And I wholeheartedly agree with you. And I think, the magic part happens at step number 3, right? Because step number 1 and step number 2, okay, take 2 steps back here, right? Strategy is a unique set of choices that define where I'm going to play, what's going to create my competitive advantage, and how I'm going to win, right? And there's a whole bunch of that, and it fits very well, Chris, with your ends, ways, and means piece. What choices am I going to make? What do I have to do? And how am I going to win, right? I think we need to be really careful about 1 and 2, because as we, as an industry, move through this transformation journey, 1 and 2 are going to move from strategic choices we've made to best management practices. And there's not going to be a competitive advantage that comes from them anymore, right? So it's really in step 3 where that magic starts to happen, in my opinion. So now, Chris, to your question, why is an ag retailer need a digital strategy? Let's define an ag retailer, because that's different depending on where we're at, right? If we're here in the I states, a lot of times we're thinking about a full service agronomy retail, right? They may or may not have grain facilities. They likely have application equipment. They're likely doing consulting, all of those types of things. If you move further west, you'll see more of the, especially when you get into the specialty markets, you'll see more of, I'm just selling you the product, right? How you apply it, that's up to you. I'm just selling you the product. I'm making sure it's legal, it can be sold, all of those things. So there's a lot of different definitions of ag retail. And really, when we're talking about it, we're generally talking about that full service ag retailer, right? That person that is selling inputs is probably doing some consulting, is likely doing some level of application, but it can also be, an independent seed dealer too. So now that we have that defined, why do I need one? You need a digital strategy to govern the coordination, implementation, and the prioritization of all of these digital technologies that are coming down the pipeline, right? You have to have this as a coordinated effort across your organization. A digital strategy is going to underlie almost all of your different business units, right? If you go and you talk to somebody in marketing, what's your digital strategy? Well, it's how often I'm going to post on social media. It's not really a digital strategy, right? You talk to somebody in IT, it's okay, what systems am I going to use? How am I going to roll them out? Important, but not really a digital strategy, right? It goes back to that third point that Jeff mentioned, is once you get through the first 2, we can call them stage gates or pain points, or whatever you want to call them. Once that system gets digitized, once you start to make those connections, all of those different things start to open up, right? And now I have optionality. I've got the ability to create new business models. I've got the ability to defend against disruption. And if I've got a good strategy is probably going to indicate to me where I'm most likely to be disrupted. Where's my weak point in the value chain, right? So there's a whole host of reasons.
So can I ask a really quick question in here?
Please.
Okay. So Jeff, you talked a little bit about, setting up a digital strategy and things, and Jason, we talked about retailers. Brad, I'm going to kind of maybe bring you into this just a little bit, because I think, one of the things that we have a lot of people in this world of the 45Z and all of that talking about is how do we quantify it? How do we do all these different things in there? So some people may be sitting here scratching their head just a little bit going like, oh, okay, what are we talking about egg retailers for and inputs? I think those are things that I think we have to, because my belief is you have to start from the early on is to understanding. So you may have retailers that do not have a grain sales side of their business, and you may have grain acquisition companies that are out there who do not have, like an ethanol plant, would not have for the most part, a retail side of selling input type products. And it's like, so the reason we wanted to make sure we kind of had this conversation and discussed it today was to kind of get you thinking about a bigger picture, not just about, what's the government going to pass? What is the legislation that's going? Why are we waiting for this? Okay, and obviously we had some changes in the administration, but now it's kind of like, how do we take and tie this all together so that we can take a look at that farm field? Because if you remember when I talked about it, you have the commodity, plus you have the data layer and the data enriched bushel component. Now we got to bring those together so that we can value the data and make it work to answer and give us as growers more money.
Yeah, and Jeff, can you maybe share some examples of how you've seen digital strategies successfully implemented in ag, and really some of the biggest opportunities and challenges they face in that transformation?
Yeah, sure. So there's, again, depending on what it is that you're trying to achieve, I think I would actually reframe the question as digital business. So no technology solves a problem without understanding what processes that you're actually going to, what processes actually support the current practice. Once you understand the process, and then conversely, how the people interact with that process, then that becomes the fertile ground for you to apply technology to achieve an endpoint. So where I've seen success early on in this cycle is you have a lot of work that has been done on the consumer side of the equation. So CPG companies have done a phenomenal job looking at the behavior patterns of their consumers, and then feeding the packaging and the production and the market towards those consumers. They've done a great job because they saw early on that the more engrossed they become with the behavior patterns, and the better off they are on positioning their products. That's on the end of on the value chain. There is no reason that kind of thinking can't apply across the entire value chain, from the production side of where the raw products come from in the first place. Those behavior patterns that exist that drive our marketplace, again, whether it's food, feed, fiber, energy, any of those things are applicable all the way upstream. And I think that is really where the rubber meets the road, is that if we can connect those trend lines on consumption, that actually drives us to a better digital strategy. And I have seen it work very well with the consumers.
Yeah, let me hop in here on a few things. So, the one way that I tend to think of data here in the system is as a property right, right? You produce production off that land, you can sell mineral rights off that land, and every year you're going to produce another sort of asset off that land, which is that digital value. So, I always, when I try to put on that farmer perspective, I want to put the perspective on, I own that, I produced that is mine to get value out of this chain. So a little bit to your point earlier, Dan, on the retailer side, where we're talking a little bit about retail capture here, one of the points we've tried to connect on the retail side is their role in this data enrichment or the sustainability system, right? And in the world we came from, where we were doing this sort of MRV piece, we were going out and hiring another party to come into the value chain and help us assess that data, bring that data in. As this world changes, we're finding that that data already exists between some of the retailers and some of the places that were putting data already. So I think that brings the retailer into this discussion in a really strong way, where they have the opportunity to start populating those data fields and helping that farmer organize, and to even connect them to programs. Because as we look at these sustainability partners, maybe it's a regrow or somebody like that, remember, they have to add value to the system. Otherwise, the system is going to squish them really thin, right? And what we've seen is that retailers and other folks are going to be able to add some of the same data into the system that those guys had. And the reason I get kind of excited about retailers in this is we sort of think of those as, maybe practices, products, and plant genetics, right? And it's that product piece that gets me really excited on the retailer side for some of this data journey, right? Telling the story about what product was used and the sustainability impact of that product.
So among the numerous shifts going on in the ag industry right now, one of them's a mindset shift, right? From supply side subsidies that lower costs to demand side premiums that reward sustainable practices. So this transition sort of reshapes how value is generated and distributed across the supply chain, and that's going to present challenges and opportunities. So Brad, what's the difference really between a supply side subsidy model and a demand side premium model in the context of a digital strategy and as we get in later, carbon value, which we'll talk about?
On the digital strategy, I'm less clear on that. Where I would focus that, right, is to say in sustainability, right? This is heavily couched in sustainability, right? And how do we get the behavior? And as you have three paths: practices, products, and plant genetics are generally what the technologies you're going to bring to the field, right? At the field level where sustainability happens, you're going to bring those to that piece of it. When we think about supply side versus demand side, right? A lot of the programs we see roll out in sustainability, whether it's fuels or it's in food or in animal agriculture, it is what I would call a demand side premium. We want you to put a nickel premium on the bushel to sell to you, right? We want a little bit extra on everything that's going to flow downstream. That's going to be tough right now. That's going to be tough in the current environment we're at. We're in an inflationary food environment. We're in an inflationary environment in general. So asking people to put premiums on there, it also distorts the business systems we have. The folks in procurement don't typically get bonuses for paying more for the inputs into the process that they're buying in, right? So those premiums they're just a challenge. They have to be priced at a way that makes sense. So when we look at 45Zs, and someday we'll get some rules, but to price those, to generate the working capital, to do the work you have to do there, that takes market dynamics. It takes market seeking. It takes time. So I think the demand side premiums have so much utility, both either whether you're the demand trying to pull that, or if you're a farmer, right? We kind of go in and think everybody's going to have the same mental model: do more, get more. Well, maybe that's not really what we're after here, right? Maybe there's a way we can get to people through another model. And part of that is the supply side model, right? To go in and say, well, hey, instead of working on all the premiums out here and you trying to figure out what a nickel on a bushel and a this and that, maybe we just go in and help you with the cost of your inputs. And if you use this sustainable input, this low carbon fertilizer, this whatever it might be, this enhanced efficiency fertilizer, you use that, it qualifies you downstream for the project, right? And so we're going to help you out, whether it's on financing, whether it's on input costs. Let's kind of switch that model around, help people upstream, right? Take a little bit of the risk off the farmer and produce a different incentive model for folks that they can get into here. And obviously the connection to ag retail here is to think, well, how do we bring that to the farmer? That incentive structure would probably come through the retail.
I'm surprised with this group. No one called me out for saying that backwards. So I meant to say the shift from the demand side to the supply side. So everyone here is just too polite to call me out, I guess. So Jeff, how do you think this shift impacts the way value is captured across the supply chain?
So I go back to our earlier
Text-based.
conversation.
Yeah.
The demand side is the market. The market demands what it demands, and it works itself out over time. And so the supply side incentives is the trigger. It's not the market. But sometimes it takes a trigger to get to a point where the market actually will decide that this is value. And I think that's where the inflection point is. We've now created a trigger point where certain things in agriculture are going to be incentivized for proper behavior, and that story is being told upstream in the value chain. And I do think that is where the value creation curve actually represents itself. There is an analogy, almost a direct analogy to this in other industries. So whether you if you would say if you'd say healthcare circa 2005, you really had healthcare where hospitals worked in a vacuum. They didn't actually understand the whole picture. They didn't understand someone's story across their lifetime, and they really were producing as much value as they could with just good doctors, thinking they're doing the right thing. But actually, that's not really what happened when healthcare started to attach data attributes and things like that. It created stories where a doctor could go in and get your entire history. The outcomes became better. The recognition of a future trend became better because they could predict these things and look at family history. All that stuff became a game changer in that space. Same thing with manufacturing. Manufacturing at one point was every company owned their entire supply chain from beginning to end. Every car was produced with their own supply chain. That's not the case anymore. They realize that there's closer manufacturing componentry to plants that might be able to sell in a more efficient, effective manner, and then cars got out the assembly line faster because they could do that. The financial world, the trigger in the financial world was a collapse. So everything happened in the financial world where the banking industry collapsed. And then they started to apply a regulatory pressure to say you need to understand that we're going to be looking at how you're managing your environments today so that you don't create a collapse for your lenders. So every single industry has this same recurring trend. Something happens, the market recognizes the problem or does something about it, and then corrects itself. And then ultimately, in every one of these cases, they became more digital because it was a necessity for them to become more digital to get the outcomes they really wanted.
Yeah. So Jeff, I'm going to, Chris, if I may, Jeff, I was just like, as I'm an old guy, okay, I've got an arthritic wrist, and so I went to the doctor the other day because one of the dogs jumped and I grabbed the darn thing, and it was, and it hurt it. And I went in, I said something's wrong, blah blah blah. They took pictures and they go. So they were able to look at my history forever, and ask when I had, other little surgeries here or there, sports injuries, when I looked more like an 8 than a 0, and my body type, and as you get older, it's a problem. But it was interesting. But I that analogy is really a good one, and I think it's, how do we take and apply that into, to the group that's listening to this as ethanol plant operators, farmers, transportation people, fuels people, how do we take and kind of bring that into a common sense kind of thing, or, what should we be thinking about and looking at in there? Anybody, I don't care.
Yeah, Dan, I wish I were the greatest prognosticator, but I have a perspective on it. I do think that there is a certain fear factor that always comes along when this change happens. Every change begets. Some people become aware of it. Sometimes they seek knowledge, and sometimes they desire change. Sometimes they resist change. And so this is the same, no different here. If you see this as only a disruption for the bad, you'll take steps that will probably hurt you in the long run. If you see this as an opportunity for you to get better as a retailer because you're more skilled, you're studied, and you understand what the potential set of outcomes are, you're going to create something for your customers that are going to be more valuable. So I think the issue always is, you don't know how is there 8 steps, 10 steps? Is there 2 steps that are going to happen? And I think the best position any retailer could take, and one that creates less fear, is to do your best and put together your own. I see 10 steps in this problem. We don't have enough things in systems today. Let's get that problem solved. We don't, maybe we don't leverage data like we could. Let's get that problem. Maybe there's a problem because we shouldn't share that data in certain cases. Well, let's get that problem solved before we get and put some structure around that. Ultimately, I think the vision for any of these retailers is, to the best of your ability, create a picture of the future that you want, and then create a series of plans that are incremental steps, so you're creating less fear in your own teams, not more fear in your own teams and your own customers.
Yeah.
There's you talk about the steps there, Jeff, and I'm struggling to remember who to attribute that quote to. Shoot.
Socrates.
But their comment was, it's a series of 40 steps, but I can see 2 or 3 at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to trust that everything is going to become clearer as I get closer to it, right? So, yeah.
So, Jason, how do you see ag retailers, or how can ag retailers position themselves with the shift towards the supply side subsidies? What's one or two things they could do?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, right? I mean, part of this is going back to developing that digital strategy and understanding. You asked the question earlier about a digital business model versus a digital offering, and I don't know that we answered it. But like, I have an app that I can move money around in my bank. That's a digital offer. The bank isn't making money. That's not a business for them, right? They make it's just a digital offer. But Uber is a digital business, right? They're matching supply and demand, right? So that's important to understand that difference. And so from the retail side of things, one of the things that popped into my head while I was listening to Jeff talk about the CPG companies and the digitization that has happened at that end of the value chain. One of the companies that popped into my head was US Food, right? And if I look at US Food versus maybe other ag retail, right? There's not exactly the same, but there's a lot of parallels, right? If you think about food going into the restaurant, it's largely undifferentiated. It's very much driven on price, right? All the distribution companies are carrying all the same types of products. So how do you differentiate yourself, right? So what US Food did was they actually started to build out digital tools that allowed restaurant owners to manage their menu, manage their costs, help do menu planning, help control inventory, all of those things. And by the way, it was all free. It was a digital offer from them. But what it did was it made that customer relationship very, very sticky, and it gave, the customers a reason to buy from them, right? So there's an example that a retailer could do now, is start to understand that digital offering that they can develop for their growers that makes that relationship stickier. Dan, you've talked a little bit about some of the data that's needed. Like, let's be honest, if a retailer is a full service retailer and doing all the herbicide and fertility applications, it's likely that they are generating as much, if not more, data than what the grower is, right?
Yep, absolutely.
So, you've got to think about, how do I position myself and my business for maximum optionality in the future, because technology is going to change, right? I've got to have, a digital first mindset that will allow me to pivot quickly and leverage the new technology coming down the pipeline. And I'm gonna position that in a way that it makes that relationship with my grower stickier, so that it's not just a price discussion when I'm having a conversation with my retailer, or when I'm having a conversation with my growers, right? I don't know. That's my thought on it, but feel free to tell me I'm wrong.
No.
Brad was just so amazed. He just can't even.
He had to take an A.
Hey,
so I actually got a question for you.
I have a follow-up with you on that topic. I think just because a full service retailer already has a lot of this data pre-production, pre-harvest, and then also kind of post-harvest, they've known the treatment side of the equation. I think simplicity is a key strategy.
Absolutely.
If it's already in those hands, why would you ask a grower to do things that they don't typically do and start creating things and systems that they don't typically, deal with? They already have big problems that they're trying to solve on a day-to-day basis. If an ag retailer has that, what is there? Do you see it the same way where the simplicity is key, especially when you're getting started on a digitization journey?
I do, and I'm like, look, I know this is my first time joining you guys, and I know we've talked about sustainability, and let's just get this right out there right now. I am a merchant. I am not a missionary, right? I believe that the formula for profitability is the exact same formula for sustainability, right? And that is maximum output with minimal input.
Right.
That's who I am. That's where I'm coming from. And so, absolutely, Jeff, not only start simple. I mean, there's an ag retailer over in Indiana, one state over. Their business model approach to it right now is, okay, Mr. Grower, it's $4 an acre, and I'm going to do data management for you, right? It's working, right? You go and you talk to them, well, is $4 an acre, are you making money on that? Probably. It's not a lot of margin, but I'm making margin on it. Okay, well, what's the reason for doing that? Well, it's a barrier for that grower to take his business, right? I have all their data. I'm managing all of that. I'm providing that service. I mean, I don't know if you've ever tried to switch banks or have gone from Quicken to, another financial accounting software. It's hard. Once that data is there, it is hard. It is painful to move it. Right?
iPhone to Android. You don't switch.
Yeah.
Once you're there.
Yeah.
But there is a model out here right now that's in full effect on this, and that is without FBN and ADM, right? I mean, there's a merchant where they've set it up and said, if you want to engage in our programs, you must go through this digital platform. And oh, by the way, they might try to sell you something during that.
Right? And I have to imagine all the ag retailers are thinking that's a great idea.
So that's a great idea. I mean, I think the reality is that most of these ag retailers can displace what were the RVs, right? These traditional groups are out there doing that. I think that could actually live at the ag retailer. The reason being, in the past, you were one of these specialties you had was to calculate the climate, this impact, whatever that might be. Well, when the government hands it down to you in the form of a 45Z ruling for some biofuels rules, you just use the calculator they gave you, right? And now it's about coming up with the paperwork that Treasury asked for. And so I think to this changing landscape where you're not kind of everybody's coming up with their own numbers, you're getting given a number, and now it's about proof that you did the thing. That's exactly where the retailer should step in and say, to your point, Jason, to the point we made earlier, you got the application records, you got the receipts for this, there's a high proof standard, you've got the proof that occurred.
So Brad,
Brad, that's a great example of kind of what Jeff's point was about starting simple, right? And we talked about it a little bit earlier around farm level versus field level, right? Because how many ag retails are still out there and going, oh yeah, Brad bought 40 tons of whatever. There you go. There's your receipt.
I want to frame the question. Right? I want to frame the question this way. So, Jason, to your point, like I agree, like sustainability has to be a profit center, not a cost center. Otherwise it won't succeed, right? And intrinsic in that is carbon value, right? That's, you hear that term all the time. So, but what does it mean, right? So Brad, what is carbon value? How would you define it? And then to Jason's point, how does that relate to like farm level versus field level data, which, get used interchangeably, but they're not the same thing?
Yeah, sure. Remember, the unit of production here is going to be at the field level, right? So when we record data about how you produced it, it happens at a field level. The way that it works with environmentalists and the way that it's sort of set up is that you account to the location. So we account to that field. There are some circumstances, and this is for another podcast, where we put it in our bins and we use mass balance. That's a little different, but still pretty straightforward accounting system to be used there. We think about carbon value. Carbon value only exists as data, period. right? That there is no carbon you're going to go out and pick up and do anything with, right? We were in a meeting one time, I was explaining carbon offsets, and one of the young folks one of the people in there, and I'm glad, you're always happy when people ask the question, says, well, what if they want the soil carbon back, want the carbon back out of the ground? And, it's an aha moment where you're like, it's not really what we're talking about here, right? They want that data that's being used as proof to substantiate carbon value. Carbon value,
Files are in the computer, Brad.
It's well, I mean, carbon value it's downstream. It's on the demand side, right? So you're either getting it from a food company, and right now they're not super big into the carbon value space right now. They're doing what they can, but a lot of those folks are finding out that the baseline, their assumptions they started with were actually really high. So if you go and measure anything on a farm, it's not so bad. But carbon value is expressed as that two ways, right? Practice, pay for practice. So I did a thing, it has an outcome. I cover cropped, I get so much an acre. I no-tilled, I did this, I did that, I get that. The other one is a pay for outcome, right? I did these things, you put them inside a machine and it spit out a value, an outcome that's associated with that. And I get paid on that outcome. So each field can have a different outcome. So right now, what you see in this world is a shift towards, I would call it pay for practice, right? If we look at something like a 45Z, that's going to look a lot more like a pay for practice. And when we think of that, that's for using an input, for doing a thing. That's where it's substantiating the carbon. In terms of dollars and cents behind that, that's a complicated space, right? There's 45Z dollars behind this. There's cost of carbon dollars behind this. There's foreign and state markets behind this. So there's a lot that gets baked into that. And that's a lot of time the consultative work that gets done is really around what is the carbon value? What does it come out in carbons? And then depending on your reporting framework, what is the actual financial value of that in these different circumstances? And I think that matrix can sometimes make it a little challenging, but I think the opportunity framework mindset says how we calculate the carbon matters, what the practices are matter, and then finding the market that values that the most, right? So that's sort of the part that remains a little hazy for many folks, is optimizing to the market and optimizing to the financial value of the carbon.
So we're coming short on time, coming up on time here, and in the interest of time, and making sure we can get everything covered, I want to jump in real quick to talk about digital tools for carbon strategies, and we'll do a whole other episode going into a little more detail about this soon. But these digital tools we talked about are the backbone of these strategies, right? You said it's all about the data. So we're talking about enabling the tracking, verification, and ultimately monetization of data across these supply chains. So at a high level, I want to ask a couple questions. So Jeff, I mean, the ag ecosystem, data ecosystem now is like this Gordian knot of interconnected, tools. How do you view the ecosystem, and what do you think is going to be needed to help consolidate and get this data in a more usable format?
You're correct. It's a very, very complicated weave of lots and lots of different housers of data that's needed to do this all together. But the nice part about being later on in the digital evolution of things, we have models that we can borrow from. This is no different than any other industry experienced, where there are thousands of companies that were providing financial tools, and we had all stitched together the banking solution. And so they've already got a backbone created. They just, I believe that to lessen the fear of how this is going to happen, digital tools are not really the issue that we're going to have to deal with. It's the can we adjust to the function of the outcome that we want, which is we've got a more flexible backbone of data flow, and two, can we just take one of the ones that exist today and repurpose it? There's really sophisticated answers that came out of other industries. And it seems to me like it would be a benefit to us to, before we try to go out and create something that's brand new, look at something else that's already been solved and apply it. And and then build on that for applicability to agriculture or any of our value chains. So my mind ultimately would say systems are smart. We have the benefit of machine learning and AI, and it's easy for systems to communicate together. It's unlike it was even 5 or 10 years ago. It's just easier to do those things. And then we've got the benefit of being, an industry that's way down the curve on the maturity of getting towards a complete digital future. That's a good thing. We can do it the right way this time.
Hey, Chris, hang on just 1 second. Jeff, I got to sit in a meeting with you, and I know that your company has evolved some new products to bring some of this information and into it, and then help even in the back offices, and in the grain acquiring and the origination side, so they could understand different things. I'm going to tell you this because I think it was great. I saw the ladies, quote unquote. I shouldn't probably say it that way, should I? There was a couple of very highly
influential.
Let's put it that way. People who were very, very intimate with the systems that they have in their facility, which happened to be one of yours, and they were excited because you made it easy for them to go through this and make it work. I think you've accomplished that, and bravo to you for that. And I think it's because you've captured it. You didn't, back to that intersection I talked about in the beginning, I think you brought a circle together, a traffic kind of circle, that was able to bring to light all of those pluses and minuses that people see. And so instead of a four-way stop, then not knowing who to go first, you made it that way. I saw these people who are very influential in their operations of the business, absolutely love what they saw. And so bravo to you and your team to make those things happen. And I think that same thing we could put back into the retail side, and the input side of this, to get some of that farmer level data to make it even easier for them to do it.
Dan, I couldn't agree with you more, but I would say one thing. The experience was they would be credited for the decisions on how we adjusted the tools to meet their needs.
Yes.
The issue with technology, the best technology listens to its customers first, looks at the business processes, and the business people tell you what they want. The challenge comes when technologists try to do this in a vacuum, and they use the wizardry of technology to create solutions that no one really needs. So the best part of that discussion in general was the fact that they told us what they wanted and what they didn't want in really basic terms that we technologists could understand. Like, okay, don't rock my world by making me do something that I never wanted to do before, or go into 10 systems. Even if it's super pretty, all I want is just make it a part of this contracting process and make it super simple, and then give me an output, and then I'm all in. So I would have said a circle in the retail space where you get some really influential people, or good people that know that process like the back of their hand. And even competitors, sometimes you get two competitors in the room and they can jive off each other and say, okay, this is the process that can work. I think gives us the best outcome for a holistic industry solve, rather than we go solve this for this company and we go solve this for this company. I think the best outcome would be, let's get a group together, call it a circle or a group of influencers, and tell us what they want in the outcome, and make those influencers business-minded folks.
That sounds like a mission that we've got to go on.
It does.
A consortium, if you will.
Yeah.
Give me that too. Jason, what are your thoughts on that consortium, for the input side?
I'm just really wondering, based off of all this conversation we've had today, right? We're talking about digital strategy and digital business models, and that we are not creating competitive advantage in the ways that we used to. And I know that there's a lot of technological challenges, and I know that it's a largely undefined space. It's a fragmented market, all of those things. But and Jeff, I'd be really, really interested in your opinion and your experience here. This is still a mind shift that people aren't thinking in a digital first way, and they're thinking that, well, it was 2006, Clive Humbly, right? Data's the new oil. My data is super valuable. I don't want to share it.
Mhm.
That haven't got that mindset that data increases in value as it's integrated with other data, right? You start to refine things and you add to it, and it becomes, you get more context, and then data becomes more valuable when we can associate it with a physical output like the data enriched bushels, right? And then it becomes the most valuable when it can deliver a better outcome. Very similar to what your example you gave in healthcare, right?
Mhm.
Like there's value tiers there, but if we can't get people to understand that data has to be aggregated with other data, and we can do it in an anonymized way, right? We can do all of that. Is that really a problem for us?
So I don't know if it's the mindset shift as much, because if you would ask anybody in a space that's been there for a while, and say, do you think your kids are going to be doing the same kind of job in the same way you did? You know,
Right.
and the answer probably is no. My kids won't even answer the phone call. They've never actually received a piece of mail. They don't know any of those things. Text is like old school to them. So I don't know if they don't recognize that the evolution is happening. They understand that part. I do think there's a fear and a concern that if I share too much, I'm actually going to destroy my own value proposition. I mean, and I think that's a real fear.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at say the way Europe did it, it created not just a fear, but a reaction. They're demanding someone share information that actually does disrupt the chain or makes profitability less attainable. That's the fear. I think that if you do it right, and again, I think there's a principle at play. If you establish a principle that says we're going to do no, you're going to do no harm. This is for the betterment, efficiency, effectiveness, less waste of the industry, like you said. Least amount of energy input, most amount of output. That's what we're after. We don't want it to disrupt, destroy, or prevent you from making profit. This is not that. We'll do everything to prevent that, and we're going to put some boundaries on that. I mean, I think again, when you talk about data, that's the second part of your question. Do we think that sharing data can be done responsibly? And the answer is obviously yes, but people don't know that until you actually put put the controls in place to prevent it from being used inappropriately. I mean, I think Brad would agree that anything you're collecting in terms of data could be used against you if it's not used for the right purpose.
So
I think that's got to be part of the story.
I mean,
I
this
would
is
say
actually
on
an
the
area
data
that,
piece,
Yeah.
just to add to that,
yeah.
listen, get your data organized. Take ownership and title of that. Make sure that other people are taking the correct licenses to it. Because the simple question is, are they launching fewer satellites? And the answer is no. And they're getting better every day. And so if you don't get your data organized and you don't take care of it and you don't say this is mine, they will take pictures from space. They will take, gosh knows what they'll send up there in the next 10 years. They'll be able to tell whatever you're doing down there, and they will buy it from a vendor, which is a nasty practice that sometimes happens today. But that, really advocating for your data belonging to you, I think is important here. And then understanding some of the use cases downstream. But if you don't get it together, somebody else will find a way.
Yeah,
I
so
wasn't sure where you were going with that, Brad. I thought I was going
I'll
to
put
have to
on-
send you a hat rack for your tinfoil hat.
yeah, so I'll put on my specialty hat as the cybersecurity data scientist here. So, dealing a lot with data and compliance. So I really think there's 4 things a tech company or an AgTech company would have to do when you're talking about data and trust. Is one is transparency and consent. You have to have that there. What am I using your data for? What am I getting? The second part is data minimization. We always have this urge to collect everything, right? It's like more is better. Not necessarily so, right? So I think we need to be transparent and consent. We collect the minimum we need necessary to execute the function we're trying to achieve. We have to be very diligent about anonymization and encryption. And then to Brad's point, ownership and access. We have to respect the ownership of who owns the data. Data has to be portable, and we need access control. So I think those 4 key areas are probably the top of the 10 or 12 different things you need to build data trust in the environment.
Yeah, and you got to tune into our John Deere episode we'll do in the coming future here around how data and transformation of data and these things, because there's so much packed into that little space there that I think people would find really, really interesting.
All right, well, we got the next two topics. All right, gentlemen, we're at time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this episode. Jeff, really appreciate your expertise. Jason, you'll be on more of these, and Brad and Dan, as always. Dan, closing comments as an old dirt farmer from North Dakota. Everything you just heard, for 1 minute or less, put on your farmer hat and tell me what's your biggest takeaway.
Well, I can't just put on my farmer hat. Okay, I got to put ethanol plant ownership in there. What do you do? What do you do? You know, you got these things coming down. A lot of people are knocking at your door and talking to you. Try to, make it simple, I think, is the best thing to think about. Make sure that you're de-risked on the because you have the only relationship with the Treasury Department. Make sure that the data that's coming in is de-risked. Growers, I remember who said it out here, but get your data in order, okay? Because it's really important, because it's going to give you optionality. It's a thing we look at. We always want different markets. Get your data in order, embrace it, and then protect it, and find those trusted partners out there. If you don't know where to go, call one of us. I mean, we're here to talk about it. Jeff, you work with a company that's that's been in this business forever, and it seems like, and Jason, you worked with companies. Bring them in. People who are here. We're here to help. We're not here to hurt you. And it is like, I think we've seen what in all of our experiences in the agricultural world and from technology and data, we've seen what can happen, and it's not good sometimes. But I am not fearful of it, and I'm old. I should be the one that's the most fearful of all this stuff, because it's like they're coming to get us, right? I don't think that at all. It's now you got to grab the bull by the horns. You know what? And the other thing is, it's much nicer to ride the bull than that bull riding you. So I would say, so put the spurs on, put the hat on, and yay, let's go. So I think I think there's lots of things that are here that we could do, but ride the bull.
Yeah, Dan, like when I came to your farm and you kept convincing me I had to milk the bull and I didn't know what I was doing. Thanks for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah. All right, gentlemen, thanks for joining us at the Data Enrich Bushel Podcast. Jeff, Jason, Brad, and to whoever's watching this out there, thanks for your time, and we'll be following up in a month. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, gentlemen. We'll see ya.
Yep.